I'd like to speak to you today about a subject that I'm very passionate about. The use of plastics threatens our ocean ecosystems and our own health and must be reduced. Our planet Earth is 71% ocean, and the number of plastics that are finding their way into the oceans has grown to such a rate that we now have these enormous areas of trash and plastic all clumped together, floating around in the ocean, forming these huge floating islands. Back in 2003, Captain Charles Moore was sailing in the Pacific Ocean, and he came across one of these areas that he nicknamed the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in an article that he published shortly thereafter. And that's looked back to as one of the beginning points of where we really started to recognize how big a situation this was. We've gotten to the point now where there are various forms of trash floating in all the different oceans in the world. The way it works is that the oceans have these currents that seem to flow in circular patterns driven by the wind and the tidal currents. And because of the circular patterns of them, they end up pulling all these areas of trash into what's commonly referred to as trash gyres. You can see them now in every major ocean around the world. So, why do you care? What's the point? Why am I even concerned about this issue? The reality is that the food chain affects all of us. The little fish are eating the plastic, and the bigger fish eat the little fish, and then you're eating the bigger fish. In turn, you end up with ingesting that plastic. So you might think to yourself, well, gee, I just drank a chocolate milk out of a plastic bottle, and how is one of those little fish ever going to eat that? Well, it turns out that if you take the UV rays of the sun and you combine those with all the churning motion of the ocean and all the waves that are worked up on the open water, it ends up taking what started out as larger pieces of plastic, bottles, etc., and breaking them down into smaller and smaller pieces that eventually look almost exactly like what the fish eat, what their normal diet is. And we call these microplastics. In other words, the plastics have broken down to this point. The problem is, plastics are not biodegradable. They will never, ever completely break down. They just end up looking like this, these tiny pieces of plastic floating around in ever-increasing numbers throughout the world's oceans. We can find in fish all over the world now these microplastics that are being ingested and then being carried up the food chain. The scary part is that according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, about 8 million metric tons of these plastics are entering our oceans every year. Long-term effects are really not even fully understood yet. The chemicals that are involved in the plastics that are made in the manufacture of the plastics, along with microorganisms that attach themselves to these plastics and are not normally found within the fish, are finding their way into the food chain. So what can you do about it? Well, I think everybody has seen this particular symbol, the reduce, reuse, and recycle symbol. It's on everybody's got a trash can around, or pretty much all over the United States now we're seeing them. So the key is to really embrace that. You may like Starbucks. I go about 3 times a week. So instead of using those plastic cups and straws that Starbucks hands you over the counter, bring your own cup with a reusable straw. My 3 trips a week times 52 weeks out of the year, that's 160 cups that I alone, just me, has kept out of the landfill by simply using a reusable cup and straw in place of the plastic that's coming from them. The other great place to keep the oceans cleaner is when you go to the beach. So many millions of people go to the beach, and those little bits of trash and plastic that come from the things we carry to the beach end up finding their way into the water. The Ban List 2.0, which was created by the Five Gyres Institute, a nonprofit organization that studies just this exact problem, has found that the top 5 things that we find in these plastic floating islands are things like gum wrappers and Snickers bar wrappers and the other various plastic products that we see regularly. So, use of these plastics threatens our ecosystems and our own health, and we must make a greater effort to reduce the amount of these plastics that we are using and throwing away and allowing to make it out into the environment and find their way into the ocean, either through blowing off the beach or making their way down the rivers. Thank you.